so much for coming out this afternoon. We have goodies on the back table. We have blended smoothies in honor of today's event, so please help yourself to that. We are thrilled to host this event today at Book Passage, and we're so grateful that you're here supporting your local independent bookstore. Before we begin, if you can check that your cell phones are off, I would appreciate that, and so would the authors. My name is Monica Golden, and I will be the host for today's event. We are so pleased at Book Passage to welcome 7 of the authors who contributed to Blended, Writers on the Step Family Experience. Please give a warm welcome to Betsy Fassbender, who is the host of Words Off Paper. Thank you.
This is such a lovely watering hole, isn't it? There are worse places to be trapped on a Sunday afternoon than a lovely independent bookstore that's so friendly to authors. We consider this, in my family, the crack house, since it's where all of our money goes. So welcome. I want to thank Book Passage, and Monica specifically. Such a lovely place and just a warm welcome. You have no idea. We go to other bookstores, and it's never quite as nice as this one. They should tell you. My name is Betsy Fassbender, as she mentioned, and I'm the host of an event called Words Off Paper, a reading series. And so when I was welcomed as part of this particular anthology, I thought, well, let's just call it a Words Off Paper event, and that's how this evolved. So I want to thank our wonderful editor, Samantha Waltz, who assembled this amazing bit of gathering of people and gathering of authors and wrangling of cats and herding of goldfish and all the things that she did. So thank you. A couple of practical things. Amy, my dear friend back there, is going to start a sign-up sheet back there. You will not be spammed, I promise. It's just to sign up so that you'll get literary notices now and then. Send 5 or 6 a year, so it's not a big deal. If you'd like to be on the Words Off Paper mailing list, you can sign up for that. Please print carefully, because I'm the one that types in your email addresses, and it's really tricky sometimes. Also, I'd like to thank the other contributors to this book and the other authors, some of whom have come from as far as New Jersey or Texas and the East Bay. Some have driven up from Southern California. So I want to thank them for arriving here and bringing their lovely selves. And thank you to all of you for welcoming me among these pages. It's deeply an honor. At the end of our talk today, there'll be an opportunity for you to buy not only Blended, but also the books of the other books that the authors have contributed. So if you're interested in doing that, and we'll have some Q&A and some book signings, so please feel free to do that. I've been thinking a lot about families since sending in my entry to Blended. And I've been thinking about how oddly and strangely families are shaped. The family tree thing almost doesn't work. It sort of looks like a bonsai now. You have to add extra limbs. And I remembered that when I first moved to California as an adolescent, we lived down the road from a man who was an orchard grafter. He grafted trees together. And in his backyard, he had a tree that had 52 kinds of citrus on it. And I just remember thinking that was amazing, that was even possible. And now I realize that that's also possible metaphorically in our families, that we're forever grafting different pieces together. And sometimes the graft works great, and sometimes it's kind of tough. Sometimes it doesn't work so easily. So I've decided also that we need a new kind of vocabulary for what used to be called steps. The steps and the halves, the stepbrothers and the half-brothers. That's always bothered me in my own family. So I decided to make up a new vocabulary. You can decide to adopt it if you choose. And I decided that I have so many friends that are family, and family that I like as well as friends, that I'm going to call them framly. And then you can start to think that you have fristers and frothers, and that you have friends and frauders, fret mother and fret father, all of those. And if you conceived your child in a less than traditional route, you might have a furrigate, you might have a froner. So in friendly divorces, you have frexes. So the regular X's are the other kind, but the friendly ones we'll call that. So what we have represented in this story is a whole lot of different kinds of families of all shapes, of all sizes, of all configurations, and that really what it all boils down to is love and family and friendship. Family, I can't not say it. A couple of quotes to start us off, and then we'll begin. Not all families work perfectly. In fact, I think that term dysfunctional family that came out in the 80s, it's sort of defunct now, but I just think families function as well as they can given who they are. And some of them are a little more lopsided than others. But Cary Grant said, insanity runs in our family. It practically gallops. So you'll read, there are some elements of that in there. Mary Card, fabulous memoirist, said, I think a dysfunctional family is any family with more than one person in it. And finally, a quote that was attributed to two different people, Friedrich Nietzsche as well as Eva Burroughs. I don't know who said it, so I'll give credit to both. Family love is messy, clinging, and in an annoyingly repetitive pattern, like bad wallpaper. Even in the most traditional families, we're all blended. Even if it's one man, one woman, they're still bringing together their two family cultures. And then when you add one man, one woman, another man, you start to add it all in, it just gets to be this amazing, beautiful, grafted tree of all kinds of different fruits. It is my honor to welcome you all and to introduce our first reader. Samantha Waltz is the editor of the Collected Stories in Blended. She sold her first story at age 11 to a local newspaper. Her guest editor and assistant editor for Mademoiselle, excuse me, I skipped a line there. Her next stories appeared in An American Girl, and she later worked as a guest editor and assistant editor for Mademoiselle. Her books include Parenting, 4 Patterns in Childbearing, Rearing, Parenting Gifted Children, and The Gifted Child, Masterpiece in the Making. Those are all published under another name. A lot of blended people have different names. They change over time. And hers was Samelin Wood. You can look this up. She has over 60 personal essays in anthologies and received many awards for her writing, not surprisingly. And she has extensive teaching and editorial experience and has helped hundreds of writers craft excellent stories. Her passions include her family of 3 children and 5 stepchildren, friends, dog, horse, and ballroom dancing. Please welcome with me, Samantha Waltz.
Well, I think it's upwards.
Oh, okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Special thanks to Amy and Joel and to our Seal editor and publicist and Donna, assistant publicist. Not supposed to say anything else, but I have to thank them for coming. More than a decade ago, when I was working as a family therapist, I hadn't yet become part of a blended family. I looked into the faces of 30 step-parents gathered for my workshop on step-parenting, all of them leaning forward on folding chairs, eager for the new insights that I would surely offer to help them in their family relationships. At the time, my book on parenting styles had recently been released. I was confident my information on setting appropriate expectations, improving communication skills, and utilizing effective problem-solving tools would help them. After all, I keynoted a regional early childhood conference a few weeks earlier, and I'd previously presented numerous workshops on parenting topics. True, this was the first workshop targeted to step-parents, but I wasn't expecting it to be that different from the others. I was so wrong. As I taped large sheets of butcher paper to the walls, I asked the participants to call out the issues they most wanted to discuss. The words flew at me from every part of the room: loyalty, jealousy, displacement, grief, guilt. How to deal with biological parents, visitation schedules, multiple parents at holidays, different surnames. What to do about expectations from the spouse, the kids, society, and oneself. How to set boundaries with children who you desperately want to win over. When I listened to the fears and heartache of these parents, I began to understand the unique difficulties they face. Part of every step family member's memories, and even his or her heart, is often in another home. The words stepfather, stepmother, and stepchild exist in Old English forms related to the word askepad, meaning bereaved. Visitation is not the same as having a mother or father or child bonded with in infancy, living with him or her on a daily basis, tucking them in at night and sharing a story or secret. When a parent passes away, all possibility of playing ball or making Christmas cookies together is gone. So despite a tremendous desire to please, a step-parent can come off as a poor second to a beloved birth parent. A step-parent can also become the target of a stepchild's displaced anger with a mother or father. Unfair? Of course. A difficulty that can be overcome? Sometimes, but not always. The step-parent has usually done nothing except stand in the line of fire. And then there's the power of the mythology about evil stepmothers and wicked stepfathers that has existed since before the Brothers Grimm. Family problems feel clammy on step-parents' skin, and they aren't sure what they've done wrong or how to succeed. But they must somehow prove themselves a good guy over and over. Every step situation is different. The family may have a traditional or non-traditional configuration. A child's age and experience with a biological parent will bring a unique perspective of the step-parent. Irrational as it seems, a child may choose to like or dislike a step-parent before ever meeting him or her. Until I taught that workshop for step-parents, I envisioned step-families as bigger and better. Complicated, sure, but worth it. I had wanted to be part of a large family since the spring break of 5th grade when I stayed on my cousin's farm. I could still picture those mornings when I joined my 10 cousins, ages 3 to 22, forming a line down the hall outside the farmhouse's single bathroom, toothbrushes in hand, everyone cracking jokes as we waited. My stomach had ached from laughing so much. Years later, when I became a stepmom, I learned that more is not always merrier. A patchwork family needs extra effort and care, and even then there is no guarantee of happy ever after. Today I have more wisdom and less advice. As a stepmother to 6 adult children, I care passionately about the challenges and successes of stepfamilies. More than half the families in America are living in step. Some work beautifully, but more than 60% are toying with conflict and will end in dissolution. Parents and children currently living in step families or coming from them and making their way in their own families have stories that will entertain, inform, perhaps trouble, but ultimately inspire us. When I met and fell in love with my husband Ray, I asked the officiant for our wedding if I could plan a ceremony that united not only Ray and me, but also my 3 grown children and his 6, 3 each from his 2 former marriages. I assumed that although we wouldn't all live under the same roof, our new family would be a big, bustling, jovial brood like my cousins. I arranged for all our children to precede me down the aisle, except his oldest son who couldn't be with us because of health issues. Each of my children was on the arm of one of Ray's, with the daughter from his first family on the arm of the son from his second. Tears of happiness washed down my face at the celebration of our marriage and blending of our families. I hadn't a clue what challenges we would face. I struggled to feel part of a large family with a common history, but more often felt excluded. I was the new kid on the team, and the rest had been holding practice for decades. At every family gathering, I smiled bravely through story after story from the life they shared before I arrived on the scene. Frequent talk of exes especially hurt. Sometimes I tried to join in the conversation. Other times I slipped out of the room, blinking back tears. No one seemed to notice. Gradually, I built a relationship with each member of our combined family. I am fortunate. Everyone in our family works hard to keep lines of communication open, even when feelings run high and hot, to make time for each other, to treat each other with respect, to grieve each other's disappointments, and to celebrate each other's successes. Ray and I had imagined our children becoming best friends. That hasn't happened. They simply don't have much in common. But they like each other, and some of them keep in touch on Facebook or through email. The stepdaughters in town attend my daughter-in-law's fashion shows. Everyone makes a determined effort to attend family events. We are one of thousands of step families facing enormous challenges. Some stories in this book very proud of. Offer a model for creating order and peace out of a tangle of separate relationships. And others let us know it isn't always possible. Some warm your heart and make you smile. Others spark tears of empathy. All of them will broaden your understanding of step families and offer guidance, compassion, and hope. It's my honor to introduce Barbara Lodge next. She's not only a fabulous writer, she's become a soul sister. It's one of the joys of editing this book. Barbara Lodge is an essayist whose work has appeared in a variety of anthologies and print, such as the New York Times and Los Angeles Times. She has 2 young adult children. Her son is a 21-year-old music producer who makes her hair gray. And her daughter is a 23-year-old electrical engineer who doesn't. She's sandwiched between her kids and active 93-year-old mother who keeps her hopping even on a slow day. Barbara is currently completing both her memoir and a certificate in creative nonfiction from UCLA Writers Program. And her story, Takes a Villa, is fabulous. You'll enjoy reading it.
Since my children were small, I've dreamt of renting a villa in Tuscany. I envisioned my family hiding and seeking in tall sunflower fields, swimming in an infinity pool nestled in the hills, and eating homemade pizza, hot and fresh from our wood-fired outdoor pizza oven. Somewhere between that fantasy and reality, however, my marriage crumbled. Yet the idyllic Italian dream didn't. It simply morphed into a happily ever after post-divorce broken family vacation, with kids, significant others, and all. As this year marks my son's high school graduation and daughter's 21st birthday, the timing couldn't be better. Louise, my partner of nearly 4 years, is on board with the idea, although she periodically questions my motives with inquiries such as, "Are you serious?" or "Have you really thought this through?" Yes, of course I have. I've been working overtime for a decade, layering good over bad and creating the most intact broken family divorce has ever seen. Why? Because children depend upon their mother and father for safety, security, and stability. We owe them at least that much. Via a little denial of the not-so-easy moments between us, a lot of friendly friendship, and regular weekly dinners, my ex-husband Mark and I have earned ourselves a place under the Tuscan sun. Well, Mark and his longtime girlfriend Layla are late. Perhaps they missed train connections in Rome. Maybe they got lost. This place is hard to find deep in central Italy, high atop a grassy knoll, down a narrow street, up a 3-mile driveway behind a wrought iron gate. I tend to worry. When we finally hear the sound of tires crunching along the dirt road, both Gary and Angela race outside and run towards the taxi, laughing, waving, and yelling, "Hey, Dad!" I watch from the veranda, brimming with achievement. It's really true. We are all in Italy. Mark emerges from the back seat with a bottle of Jack Daniels in one hand and 2 boxes of Cuban cigars in the other. His first words to the kids are, "Hi guys, you can legally drink here." Shows off the liquid gold as if it's an Olympic medal, then looks at me directly and offers by way of reassurance, "Don't worry, Barb, I'm going to teach them some hard lessons about overindulging." Okay, let it be noted, number 1, Mark's a recovering alcoholic addict who I thought was clean and sober. Number 2, our genetically predisposed kids should not drink. Number 3, or smoke. Numbers 4, 5, and 6, Mark knows these things, he's their father, and I'm paying for this vacation. Mark and Layla, a recovering heroin addict herself who met in drug and alcohol rehab, who's sweet, fit, beautiful, and very close to our daughter's age, chose to stay in a 2-story guest house instead of the main house with the rest of us. Angela is immediately concerned they feel ostracized. I fear she might be right. Louise thinks they'll enjoy their own space. Gary just wants to get tan. Anyway, the entire compound is spectacular. Both the main villa and guest house are surrounded by gardens of lavender, thyme, rosemary, red roses, a large grassy yard, and olive trees. It's all so very Italian, constructed of honey-colored stone with a red-tiled roof and terracotta floors. The villa was built on a foundation of an 1800s farmhouse, which itself was built on ancient Etruscan land. Our kids are less amazed by its historical significance than by the fact that we have an infinity pool. Well, Layla downs a whole bottle of local white wine before dinner while the rest of us play netless water volleyball. Upstairs in our room, I rant, Louise, did you see that? He drinks Jack Daniels and he smokes cigars. Layla too? Who are these strangers? To which Louise responds in her usual Zen master tone, you gonna tell him to leave? Well, no. Well, then there's nothing you can do. He's their father, the other half of their parental unit. You invited him here, and he can do what he wants with the kids. This might be a very long week. Our first evening together is Father's Day in the States, so I planned a very happy Father's Day pizza-making celebration in our chef's kitchen with local Italian professional. I can depend on Mark's easy-talking style, Louise's equanimity, and the kids' pure excitement to carry us through any awkward moments. The owner of the Villa Gianfranco enters through the back door to introduce himself, and I overhear Mark asking in a low, almost whispering tone if he can per favore get some birra. Wait, what? Gianfranco obliges and returns with a case of Peroni while I leave the area pretending to look something up in our travel book. The open design of the ground floor with the living room flowing into the kitchen, dining room, and casual eating space is something I was particularly excited about. I hadn't anticipated wanting to slam a heavy wooden door. I tried, and failed, to not watch from the living room as Mark takes a beer, presses it flush against his leg, and steals out into the backyard. But I'll leave this one alone. We're not married anymore, and we're on a perfect dream vacation. Chef Juliana calls us into the kitchen and gives us matching aprons printed with colorful pictures of Italian pastas, vegetables, and spices. We spread flour onto the granite countertops and begin kneading raw dough. The watercolor hills turn pastel pinks as sunbeams stretch far and wide, reaching almost through our open kitchen window. Sunbeams remind me of my father. Perhaps from beyond, he's signaling the possibility that matching aprons do not a perfect family make. I have no time to consider his insight. I've got zucchini to chop. Dinner's ready and we move outside to the veranda, taking our seats at the rustic wooden table. Rolled hay bales dot the land as far as the eyes can see, and the sun drops behind the horizon, turning the air soft, blue, and forgiving. The chef provides local wines paired with our pizzas. Since everyone's of age and Mark's already pouring, I tell the kids that here in Italy their choices are their own, and I hope they make good ones. By the end of dinner, having watched Mark and the kids enjoy themselves to their fullest extent, I find myself bursting with carbs and concern. I have no choice but to throw down my napkin, stand up, and suggest, my voice a tad higher than usual, hey, I know, let's go into the backyard. To which Mark responds, we're heading right there now for cigars and Jack, join us. And everything happens so fast as Mark's young girlfriend teaches my daughter, who teaches me how to take my first ever shot of whiskey. You can't sip it, Mom. You open your throat, hold your nose, and swallow. Well, when in Tuscany, I drink that burning liquid because the more I have, the less I feel. I could have stopped their party, but in truth, didn't want to. Voicing my disapproval would evolve into a family upheaval, with me the overreactive party pooper. Too many times at home, I've owned that role, being the ruling dictator of our domain. Here, sheltered in the merciful hills of Tuscany, I step down and choose to be part of the fun. Plus, if I drink more, there's less left for them. Sooner than later, the Jack Daniels is exhausted, and to my great relief, our party moves inside. Okay, good night, guys. Wow, what a night. I make towards the stairway, feeling more numb than my enthusiastic tone reveals. Where are you going? My inebriated son asks. His cheeks are red, his words slurring, and he appears to have shrunk a few inches from his original 6'1" frame. Angela, it seems, can handle her alcohol and interjects with great conviction and clarity, you guys should stay, we're going to play poker and drink beer. When in hell did we decide that? Louise and I decline their invitation and resort to our moonlit bedroom, diaphanous white curtains flowing in the breeze. The bathroom floor, where I spend most of the night alone in order to reel and feel and wonder what kind of half-baked crazy went into this vacation plan, boasts lovely travertine marble from the local quarry. Every day is new, and on this next one, we pile into the minivan headed for Florence. Okay, next up is Emma Kate Sy, a wonderful writer and editor in Houston, Texas, where she lives with her husband and son. Her writing has been published in Brainchild Magazine, Elephant Journal, Connotation Press, and Intellectual Refuge. Her work can be found in Seal Press's Drinking Diaries, Women Serve Their Stories Straight Up, and the upcoming Blended, Writers on the Step Family Experience. Emma loves cooking, journaling, and making lists.
If I married this woman, my father answered, she'd be your stepmother. School was over for the day. I was in the 5th grade, and it was my turn to sit up front. I had asked my father for the definitions of in-law and stepfamily after a class discussion about relationship terms. It was then that he pulled the photograph out of his wallet to show me what stepmother would mean for me. If he married her, who was she? What was her name? Did my father have a girlfriend? Did they hold hands? How old was she? Had he taken the picture himself, or had she given it to him? I stared straight ahead and didn't ask a word. My sister Addie and my brother Elliot whispered to each other in the back seat. As I shifted against the sticky plastic upholstery, I wished I were with them, further away from the beautiful stranger now pocketed. The woman's name was enough. Soon after the photograph emerged from my father's pocket, Baba told us he was going out on a date. It was the first time he had ever hired a babysitter. He'd been seeing us, and my inquisitiveness brought this new relationship and the photograph to light. When I was at Mom's, I always imagined Baba doing what he did when we were there, cooking gailan and rice, washing the dishes, taking a call from his mother, some old friend in Taiwan, shouting, "What Sai?" and slapping his thigh. I was wrong to think he was alone. He was with her. Stupid, pretty Chinese woman. The following weekend, the photographed woman became three-dimensional. We met her in the cavernous auditorium of the Chinese Culture Center, where we spent every weekend. Theater had brought my father and Ines together. My father performed in Chinese drama and rehearsed at the center. Ines, as a favor to her sister-in-law, who acted opposite my father, agreed to be an extra. I put my book down to watch this 5-foot woman float toward my father. His eyes widened, and then he grinned. I almost didn't recognize him. At 10, I couldn't know what it was, but later I realized I was witnessing my father's heart soften. "Girls, lie, boy." My father called us over just as he always did after rehearsal. Normally he would stand there, his little ducklings tucked behind his back, and wait for our next directive. What would I do if he demanded hug her? Did I have to do it? Could I stand in defiance in defense of my mother? Would my sister join me in a front against this woman, this foreigner, my father's girlfriend? My sister and I exchanged glances. Elliot seemed fine, oblivious. How could I escape the photographed woman becoming real? If I didn't smile, would she leave and never come back? They turned together to face us, their hands entwined. I could see only the tips of her fingers. Her hands were so small. We were brought before her like an offering, part of his dowry. As if introducing a queen, he said, "This is enough." Eventually, my father would call her La Bois, or wife in Chinese. "It's nice to meet you," she said in her small voice. We bowed our heads and each shook her hand. I couldn't be obstinate. She was too nice, too kind, too demure. "My daughters are here. They can take you to our house for a while." She didn't ask outright if we wanted to go, but just presented the opportunity as a gift. "No reason for you to stay here and do nothing." Baba said, "Girls, go with them. I pick you up later. We spend the night there." Spend the night? A ripple of excitement coursed through me. Tony and Georgette were 16 and almost 13 and lived with Ines and Ines's mother. They were coveted older girls, the access point into the life of a teenager. Tony drove us to their house on the other side of town. It must have had 7 bedrooms and just as many bathrooms, long corridors and closed doors. About an hour after we got there, my father came with lunch boxes, what he and his friends called takeout. I spent the night with Tony in her 4-poster bed, and Addie spent the night with Georgette. A Chinese man's voice poured out of Tony's boombox. Poster upon poster of Chinese rock stars covered the walls of her room. Georgette taught Addie numbers and colors in Chinese. Maybe it would be all right, all this Chinese stuff. Maybe I could become half American and half Chinese, rather than just American with a Chinese name and an exotic look. Over the short year before Baba said I do to Ines, I investigated my father's new girlfriend as if she were a crime scene. I was determined to find a piece of evidence that would deem her inappropriate for our lives. But I couldn't. Not only was Ines a far better mother to us than our own, she showed up on time and spent time with us. She was the yin to my father's yang. He was hot-tempered, she was soft-spoken and patient. He made our decisions, she asked our opinions. He was a project manager, she was a mom. Gone was the punishing routine of getting ready with my father, sitting in a hard wooden chair as he pulled my hair in pigtails so tight my eyes went slanted, eating a breakfast of oatmeal cooked the night before and left out, inheriting Elite's hand-me-downs that my father laid out for us. Ines introduced our hair to the French braid, took my mother's rose at Mother's Day pageants. Mom rarely showed or came too late. Made American kid food like grilled cheese and French toast, packed our lunches with a note, feminized our wardrobe, told my father what we were afraid to. It took a year, maybe two, before I saw how Ines transformed our lives. My father bought her a new house and a new car, and he yelled at us less often, and she wouldn't let him insult our mother, and the food was better, and my father was happier. Little details fixed themselves in my mind, that slice of life in the day-to-day I hadn't realized the divorce had cut out of my father's existence. How she took his hand in hers the minute they sat down in a movie theater, and rubbed the length of his hand with her thumb. How they started taking ballroom dance classes together and practiced in the living room. How we not only got a new mother, but my father got a new wife. My father returned her love. Ines liked to travel, so he faced his fear of flying and took her to the Bahamas for their honeymoon. She liked to dance, so they started dancing lessons. Even though my father was, and still is, obsessively frugal, he bought her designer shoes, on sale of course, once or twice a year. It wasn't long before I called Baba and Ines my parents. Mom drifted in and out of our lives as she followed men in jobs wherever they might take her, first to Phoenix, then to South Korea, where she lives now. Even though I would never call Ines Mom, that's what she's been for the last 20 years. She was there at every recital and graduation, to take me shopping for a prom dress, to rub my hair over every rejection, to talk me down from every fight with my dad. When I got lupus, she came to the hospital with my father. My mother was in Shanghai then, and when I had my first child, she came to hold him hours after he was born. My mother's still in South Korea. Now that I'm married with children of my own, actually just child, we all come together on holidays and at weekly Sunday lunches. Every single time I see it again, the wife I want to be now that I am married, the mother Ines is to me. She serves a 10-course meal without help, her cute little hand on my father's back. She bows her head and tells me to sit down and eat, Emma. I made this fish for you and these vegetables, you sit here. She brings me a bowl of chicken soup, the same chicken broth she hand-fed me when I was in the hospital that morning. She pulled my dad out of the chair he'd been sleeping in and made him go home to rest. What if my father had listened when I told him I wasn't ready? What if he hadn't married her? How different would my life be? I hate everything Chinese as I did before I met her. I wouldn't have parents. My father wouldn't have found his smile. I would have only seen marriage as what it shouldn't be, two people screaming at each other in a driveway. Instead, even 20 years later, I see a touch, a look, a nudge, a smile, a laugh. I see maternity. I see marriage. I accept myself as what I am, half Chinese.
Oh.
Jennifer Margulis, who is a Boston native but a West Coast transplant. An investigative journalist and a Fulbright grantee, Jennifer has a colorful, fascinating, and complicated blended family of origin, some of whom are in the audience today, or not, including an uncle who won a Nobel Prize and a mother who left her job as Carl Sagan's wife to pursue a theory of evolution that was originally scoffed at, but is now part of every Biology 101 textbook. Wow. Jennifer's writing has appeared on the cover of Smithsonian Magazine, in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Oprah Magazine, and dozens of other magazines and newspapers. She also has a book of her own to promote today, Your Baby, Your Way, Taking Charge of Your Pregnancy, Childbirth, and Parenting Decisions for a Happier, Healthier Family, which was just published by Scribner. That was an amazing story.
Oh. So the novelist Jane Hamilton went to New York City and she met with her agent, and her agent said, "So what are you working on?" And Jane started explaining this very complicated plot. You know, her agent said, "I hadn't seen you in a while, what's going on?" And she starts explaining her very complicated and interesting plot with all of these characters who she made up. And her agent looks at her and she goes, "That story idea sucks. Nobody's gonna buy that book." And then she says, listen, you know, you live on an apple orchard in Wisconsin. You have this crazy family. You have this fascinating business. Why don't you write about that? And Jane says, I'm waiting for all of them to die. And her agent is a New Yorker. I'm a transplant from Boston, right? And she looks at her and she says, Jane, by the time they're all dead, you'll be dead too. So Jane Hamilton goes back to her apple orchard in Wisconsin and she starts to write a new novel based on her life growing up in Wisconsin, and that novel apparently is coming out in a couple of weeks. But the reason why I'm telling you that is because Samantha Waltz a couple of years ago called me up and said, Jennifer, you know, I'm doing this anthology about blended families, and do you have a step family experience? And I thought to myself, I have to wait until everybody dies. And then I thought, Samantha doesn't have a book contract. At least as far as I knew, she was still looking for a publisher, right? And oh, you know, people, the best intentions, this usually takes about 10 years to happen. It'll be fine, you know, my father's 76 years old, like, you know. And so I said, yeah, you know, Samantha, I have a story that I could write for you. Thinking that, not that I didn't love and trust Samantha and think she'd do an amazing job, but not knowing that the outcome of the book was going to be fast-tracked and that we'd all be standing here today. So my father doesn't know about this story. There was actually a recent review that mentioned my story by name that I did not post on Facebook because he is on Facebook. And just to give you a sense of why that's important, the original title of this story was My Father's Affairs. That's not what it's called anymore, and obviously he and I need to have a really hard conversation. Instead of having that conversation, I'm standing here in front of you to say that a lot of people are afraid to write memoir because they're afraid of of hurting people's feelings. They're afraid of their stories. They're afraid of how painful it can be sometimes. And what I'm saying is really resonating with somebody in this audience. And my story is full of inaccuracies. Memory is such an imperfect thing, and it's only one version of what was happening at that very difficult time in all of our lives. And I wrote it because it was my story, and I would encourage all of you to feel empowered to write your story. And yes, it might lead to some very hard conversations. I haven't had that yet. And it might lead to some hurt feelings, but your story is your story, and it's your truth, and you get to tell it from your point of view. And anyone who doesn't like it can work that out with you, or they can write their own version of events.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So then I have to tell you something else. I have a PhD in English, but I failed reading in 5th grade, and I don't actually read very well out loud, so I'm only going to torture you with about 5 paragraphs. And then the rest of the story, you'll have to buy a copy of the book and read it yourself.
Teaser.
So this story is no longer called My Father's Affairs, but it's called Cindy and Me. And yes, we'll just start somewhere in the middle. I don't know if my father had an affair with Cindy before he and my mother split up, but I do know that after he was no longer Cindy's chemistry professor, my father started openly dating her. He wanted her to move in with us. Cindy told my father that Street would have to come too, and that my father would have to buy her a piano, a dog, and a piano. When I was 7, I'd written a series of saccharine stories about a little girl who was dying for a pet, but whose mother was allergic to cats and whose father disliked dogs. I wanted to take piano lessons after studying piano at summer camp. My father told me I probably wouldn't stay with it, and then he would have wasted his money for nothing. But now I would have Cindy and Street and a piano. I couldn't have been happier. My mother spent most of her time peering under a microscope at spirochetes in her laboratory at Boston University and flying overseas to give lectures about the origin of eukaryotic cells. She would bring Zach and me to work with her sometimes. Though I loved goofing around with her graduate students, we were stuck in her office for hours and hours. She always had just one more thing to take care of. Then, when we were finally leaving, she would stop to chatter enthusiastically with every person she saw in the hall. She liked to show off her children to her colleagues, though we shook their hands limply and stared at them sullenly, too hungry and frustrated to remember to be polite. Long past dinner time, my brother and I would be tugging on her purse and pulling at her clothes, trying physically to usher our mother out the door. I knew Cindy wouldn't be like that. She was some 15 years younger than my mom, and she seemed genuinely interested in my life, and she had a dog I could love and care for with the ferocity of a lonely little girl. Cindy moved in. She taught me to tell Treat, andiamo, let's go, to get her to poop on cue when I took her outside. She helped me figure out a clothing allowance so I could use my babysitting money to buy my own clothes, and she invited me to bicycle beside her when she went on long runs. One day I came home from school and Cindy was standing at the sink scrubbing the fireplace andirons with steel wool. "Are they dirty?" I asked. "No," she said in an oddly shrill voice. "I'm just really mad at my mother." My father was in the dining room getting ready for his weekly poker game. "Is Cindy all right?" I whispered to him, hoping I was out of earshot. He shrugged, then smiled. A lot of people have problems with their moms. Thank you. Now I get to introduce Liz Kingsley, who's a mother of 2 and a stepmother of 3, who tries to get up a little earlier every day to get more done. She's a poet and a longtime student at the Writers Studio in New York City, where she nurtures her passion for writing and helps to run the program. Her poetry has appeared in the New Ohio Review, and her fiction has been published in the William and Mary Review. One of her poems, called Trust, was nominated for a 2013 Pushcart Prize. She's currently teaching 3rd grade in her hometown of Westfield, New Jersey. Her own personal life took a very interesting turn in 2010 when she and her husband divorced and she moved in with her girlfriend and her 3 children. She writes extensively about this and about her new life in several online columns, which I hope that she will give us the names of so we can all follow you. And she is thrilled and honored to be a contributor to this collection and to share her story with you today.
Thank you. I just also want to welcome my stepbrother and his wife. We're here today. In the summer of 2008, I fell in love. Sounds simple, right? Not so much. I was 39, married to a man I'd known since 8th grade, and raising 2 young sons, 7 and 9. I was busy living my life, patching together part-time jobs to feel productive in the present, pursuing a teaching degree to become productive in the future, cultivating the writing career about which I've always dreamed, and being a dutiful wife, mother, you name it. It started on the last day of school. My older son had just finished 2nd grade. A friend with a son the same age invited me to her patio for drinks with some other moms from the same class. I felt at ease with these women and had visions of frequent get-togethers, lasting friendships in the making. The following week, several of us got an email from one of them, G, asking us to write letters of support for our boys' teacher. That was our beginning. G and I have a mutual love of writing, everything from persuasive letters to clever emails, and that love changed our lives. She and I spent the next month emailing each other constantly. Something about our initial vibe on the patio, the sharing of those teacher recommendation letters, and our email banter had me hooked, but in a way I hadn't quite defined. All I knew was that I wanted to know everything about her, and I wanted to entice her with every detail about me. We decided to take our friendship live and meet for dinner, where we closed the restaurant down. We played tennis. Singles led to intimate discussions and painful goodbyes in the doorway of her minivan. Toward the end of the summer, G went to Cape May with her family. The morning they were leaving, we met for some quick tennis. Then I crashed her quiet pre-departure work time at Starbucks because I had to see her. I told her with my heart pounding, my skin salty and rank, my hair slacked back in a ponytail, and no idea of what was to come, that I had feelings for her. I had a hunch it might be mutual, but I thought even if not, it would be okay to put myself out there. She said she felt the same way and asked if I was scared. I felt everything but. excited, bold, flattered, overcome. In that moment, fear was the farthest thing from my mind. That wouldn't last long. That fall, G and I spent every spare second together. I was student teaching, G was writing law articles in her home office, and we were caring for our families. Mostly though, we were caring for the empowering and overpowering love we felt for each other. We revealed our relationship to our husbands in November, and were faced with their devastation and what to do. G was unflinching in her certainty that she and I could build a life together, blend our 5 kids into a family, and usher all of us through this huge change so that we'd remain intact. To put it lightly, I was apprehensive. In the fall of 2009, just over a year after first meeting on the patio and months of crying, sleeping way too much, barely eating, and growing sick of paralyzing fear, I took a leap into her strong, determined, and loving arms. We could figure this out. We were creative and bright, and we wanted this so very badly. In June 2010, we moved into a house together. My 2 boys shared a room, G's 2 boys shared a room, and G's daughter had a room of her own. It took a very short time to realize just how hard this blending would be. Step families, according to the therapists helping me navigate my life, are the hardest family incarnations going. We have wonderful moments, but much of the time our life is hard. We make headway and then regress. First, the good news. Things we thought would be huge stumbling blocks have turned out fine. We are 2 stepmothers raising, along with their fathers, 5 children between the ages of 9 and 14. Tender years. We worried that they might be ridiculed in school for having 2 moms or gay moms or whatever spin mean kids would put on that. We worried that people who'd been our friends when we were heterosexually married would turn their backs. None of that has happened. In our house, 3 of us are Jewish and 4 are Episcopalian. My older son was a bit troubled by the sight of our first Christmas tree, and G's kids felt odd lighting Hanukkah candles. But my acolyting stepdaughter wanted to be lifted on a chair during my son's bar mitzvah. Finances can ruin step families and all families. Fortunately, this isn't one of our hardships. G is the primary earner in our house, and she can earn from home, so she's around for school drop-off and pickup, and anyone who develops a sore throat in between. I work as well, partly at home and partly away from home. We pay the bills, live in a comfortable home, and order pizza without feeling strapped. We worry about money, but no more as a function of our stepness. Now the not-so-good news. Part of the reason for our relative comfort level is that G and her ex-husband, who earns more than both of us, continue to operate from joint bank accounts. Everything financial between them is as it was before, only now there are 3 extra people and 1 extra house on the scene. The way G and her ex-husband care for each other and collaboratively raise their children in a state of divorce, considering our particular circumstances, is astonishing. My cadre of therapists regularly acknowledges the extraordinary quality of their relationship. The trails they blaze as they show what it looks like to be amicably, even lovingly divorced, work fabulously for almost everyone involved. While their closeness is admirable, and I want that for G and her kids, it can be hard for me, sometimes wrenching. They have a history with which I can't compete. The truth is, I like G's ex-husband. He's got a big heart and great comic timing. G wouldn't be happy if he weren't around. He's even said that he and I are now family. I want to be uber tolerant, uber understanding, uber appreciative, and uber secure, but my new life has taught me that I have uber limitations. A parallel issue is that my relationship with my ex-husband has drastically deteriorated. While he wanted very much to save our marriage, once we knew that wasn't to be, he decided we were finished. I mean finished as humans who make eye contact and exchange small courtesies. Our mode of communication is restricted to email, and the content of that communication is restricted to our boys. That's a real loss. Then there are our children. Snow White might call them moody, even-tempered, sensitive, arrogant, reluctant to take responsibility, self-punishing, frustrated, and goofy. As varied as they are, among them is a universal desire to return to the way things were, when, as the youngest says, there was a house with a mom and a dad. In addition to their individuality, the cultures in their early homes have shaped them differently. G wields her swift decision-making ability to fantastic effect when our kids' actions demand it. I talk things through and give warnings about next time. G's kids sing along with Disney movies. Mine vie to watch Contagion. Hers drink milk with dinner. Mine offer to make our drinks with vodka. It also complicates things, as strange as it may sound, that G's kids and I get along very well. G has often said how warmly they feel toward me, which I consider the highest compliment. Someone, likely a therapist, told me that the job of a step-parent is to be liked by her stepchildren. I'm sure it helps that my steps have a father who accepts me, so they can look to both their parents as models if they're not sure how to feel. My kids get no such positive reinforcement from their dad. These challenges are stubborn, but they come with incredibly rewarding moments when we palpably feel that we're building something. I turn to the bright side when things get heavy, and we certainly had one. We've taken many a deafening minivan ride with 5 children singing in unison. We've ridden death-defying roller coasters together from Dorney to Disney. When my younger son turned 10, his stepsister drew a card and covered every inch of white space with inside jokes and song lyrics. I've learned in the literature about blending families that the average blend takes between 4 and 7 years to find its groove. That's the scientific term. Our plodding pace to harmony is par for the course, and there's no shortcut, like anything worth having. Blending has brought out in me new and deeper levels of humility. I make a lot up as I go. How to be supportive of and stern with my kids as they adjust to a life they didn't want during our half weeks together. How to meld my styles of thinking, living, and mothering with a different thinker, liver, and mother. How to strengthen my rubber exterior so the coldness lobbed by my ex-husband bounces off. How to know when to advocate for us as a family and when to back off. And how to put my relationship with G first, which is vitally important. G and I argue. We unintentionally hurt each other. We spend days merely coexisting while working through angry, guilty, or confused feelings. We marvel at how hard our lives can be. We watch our kids, our ex-husbands, and ourselves struggle. Yet we are so, so grateful. Without fail, when we drift, we come back to each other because ultimately we remember why we're here. Ariel Gore is the editor and publisher of the Alternative Press Award-winning magazine Hip Mama and the author of 8 books. Her latest, The End of Eve, chronicles her years spent caring for her dying mother and has been called Terms of Endearment Meets Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. No. She also teaches the Literary Kitchen online workshops. Welcome, Ariel.
Thank you. I was lucky enough to write the foreword for this excellent book that everyone should get 5 copies of. I'll just read to you part of the foreword. My first stepdad eased himself into my life with a warm smile and few expectations. He'd been a college campus Catholic priest before he was excommunicated for marrying my mom, so I guess he'd had a lot of practice serving as a father figure to people who didn't necessarily serve as son or daughter figures. My stepdad brought structure to our family in the form of reliability rather than sudden rules. I called him John. He treated me like a short adult. I was 5 years old, and I loved him immediately like apple pie. He and my mom stayed married for more than 30 years until his death, but I suspect that even if they'd divorced, he would have stayed my dad forever. He made this fluid family thing look so easy, but not all of us can be priests. The first time I had a partner move in, I'd lived alone with my daughter for almost 12 years. I was a good mother by most people's standards, but sometimes the two of us ate dinner in front of the television. Bedtime was when we got tired. Some nights we let the dishes sit in the sink until morning. My new partner decided that she would make herself useful. She would impose some much-needed order on our chaotic single-parent household. Yes, should make some rules, should show my daughter some structure, maybe should even save us from ourselves. Predictably, my preteen daughter snarled and called this new adult a bitch. My partner stomped her foot and called my daughter homophobic. I poured myself a glass of wine and drank it too fast. Not off to a good start. Over those first first months and years, my heart went out to my partner as she tried to make a place for herself in our little family. But I wondered too if she held some basic belief that every family needed a firm dad figure. I wondered if her anxiety and jealousy about my close bond with my daughter were, in fact, running the show. The truth is that a single parent family doesn't necessarily need anything we don't already have. And the truth for me is that I would throw myself in front of a train for either of my children, but I can't say the same thing about any partner I'd ever lived with. My sister was the same way. When explaining to me why she'd kicked a new boyfriend out, she said, "I guess he thought it was a good idea to get between a mammal and her offspring." Harsh, I said, but I understood. If you ask a parent to choose between you and the children, you have to be prepared for the answer to be the children. Sometimes this is as it should be. Sometimes it's unfair. As a mother, it's always been hard for me to see the difference between putting my kids first and irrationally siding with them. It may be a very bad idea to get between a mammal and her offspring, but that's true in part because mammals have a hard time backing off and letting other mammals have their own relationships. That partner who moved in with me when my daughter was almost 12 lasted a decade with me. Things between her and my daughter were always tense. My guilt about the ways in which it hadn't worked kept me up nights, my heart contracting in my chest. So it was bittersweet the first Thanksgiving after we'd broken up that my ex and my daughter decided to get together without me for an afternoon. "Wow," my daughter said when she got home, "the two of us just had our first chill conversation ever. She actually treated me like a normal human being. She's kind of cool." I shook my head. I mean, seriously? They could have just gotten along? That how things might have gone differently. What if we treated each other more like normal human beings from the start instead of as generic players in our own preconceived notion of what family ought to look like, of how children ought to act, of where a new partner has a right to tread? Rivers and priests make it all look so easy, but for most of us this flowing on involves a lot of guesswork and panic. When it works, I think it involves a lot of faith and letting go. Thanks. And I get to welcome back Betsy. She curates and hosts the Marin County Reading Series Words Off Paper, a celebration of local and regional writers. Her award-winning debut novel, Fire and Water, is right here. It's published in 2013 by She Writes Press and is now also available as an audiobook. Betsy's especially thrilled to welcome members of her own blended family, the in-laws, some outlaws, and a few who share her DNA here to celebrate blended. She and her husband Tom live here in Marin County in their recently empty nest. With the kids out of the house, she's using her fiction writing talents to compose new excuses for avoiding writing with only intermittent success.
Thank you.
So I have to look this way, because if I look over that way, I'll just try. This is called Who Will This Be to Me? One afternoon, a few months before Tom and I were to be married, Max wandered into the dining room of our house that we all shared. I was sorting through a box of old photographs, and when he entered the room, I turned to him. He tossed a bright orange Nerf ball over and over and said nothing, didn't look at me, just focused completely on the ball. Though he was barely 7, I could already recognize the way that he threw the ball straight up and caught it with quick reflexes and fast hands of the athlete that he would become. Soon, he began to twirl after each toss, catching the spongy ball behind his back. Then, he bounced the ball off the wall over the table, then the ceiling. "Hi, bud," I said. "Nice moves." No reply. Wall, ceiling, twirl, wall. "What you doing?" he finally asked. "Just trying to organize some of my pictures." In my months of living with Tom and Max, I learned to let the boy come close on his own. If I crowded him or moved too quickly, he skittered away, his tolerance for closeness dissipating like so much water vapor. If I was patient, though,
We would often end up playing, laughing, and recently even snuggling on the couch with a book or a TV show. "Who's that?" he asked, peeking over my shoulder. "My mom, when she was young." "What's she sitting on?" "A paper moon. They used to have those at fairs and carnivals. People like to pose on pictures for them." "That's dumb. It doesn't even look like a real moon." "After the wedding, I suppose she'll be your Grandma Sylvia." "Cool." Wall, ceiling, wall, twirl. He caught the ball and then sidled up beside me, leaning his warm body against my arm and pressing a dirt-smudged finger onto another photo. "Who will that be to me?" he asked. "That was my grandfather, the one that passed away a few months ago." Max shrugged and resumed his tossing, this time switching hands, right, left, right. "I already got a grandfather," he said, not unkindly. "Well, lots of kids have two grandpas. I guess my grandfather would have been your great-grandfather." Too bad he had to die. I could have used one of those. As I continued my sorting and stacking, I felt a pinch in my chest. Death is always a barbed topic. But it's particularly so for a child who's lost his mother only 2 years before. I shuffled quickly past the pictures of dead relatives. The Nerf ball stilled again, and Max propped his elbows on the table, resting his chin in his upturned palm. "What about them?" he asked, pointing to a picture of my sister and her family. He'd known them his whole life, just as he had known me. Played with my niece and nephew regularly, attended birthday parties and family functions. But I could see that he was beginning to grasp the change that was coming, the difference in how he knew me before and how he would know me in the future. "Di and Jim will be your aunt and uncle. Megan and Matt will be your cousins." "Sweet," he said, looking into my face for the first time since he'd entered the room. His eyes were chocolate pools, his thick dark hair a sleek, shiny coat that made me want to run my fingers over it. "I don't have any boy cousins," he said. "And how about them? Or how about him? That's my brother John. He'll be another uncle." We sorted through stacks of aunts and uncles, cousins and friends. "Wow, you have a lot of people." I suppose I do. He began to finger through the stacks, messing up what I'd already sorted, but that was all right. My original task no longer mattered. As we neared the bottom of the stack, a honey-thick warmth began to fill me. Perhaps my family was to be the dowry I'd bring to this little boy who'd lost so much. "Whoa!" he exclaimed, laughing at my third-grade photo, the one where my hair had been expanded to new dimensions by an especially humid Indiana day. At moments like those, Max was just a little boy, buoyant with energy, easy with a laugh. He played Legos and watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he tossed balls. At other times, when he was still, or thought no one was looking, it seemed that the earth's pull was a little stronger where he stood, tugging at the corners of his mouth, downward, making his eyes years older than his 7 birthdays would imply. Just as I was about to put the last of the pictures in the box, Max pressed his finger once more to a face. "And who will this be to me?" Beneath his fingers, dang it. Beneath his finger, I could see the edges of my own face. I was suddenly flooded with a heart swell for which I had no name. Don't look at me. This son of the man that I loved was becoming my son. We'd have family Christmas cards and school art stuck with magnets to the fridge. I'd make goodie bags at birthday parties and snap pictures at graduations. All of these things I never thought that I would myself want, thinking that perhaps my own parents had left me so wounded that I wouldn't allow myself children of my own. Now I was becoming a mother, but without the benefit of a growing belly or a baby shower to prepare me. I should have known the answer to this simple question. I should have known how to say just the right, wise, magical thing, but I didn't. So I offered the therapist's cop-out. "Well, what do you think?" Max shrugged and then he looked away, and I knew then that it was my job to field this one. Jumbled words bobbed to the surface of my mind, like those triangled answers floating in the blue waters of a magic 8-ball. Finally, the image rose to the surface. "I'll be your second mom," I said. "Oh, I'm sorry that your first mom died," I said. "I really liked her." "What should I call you?" he asked. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my stomach turned over. "Mama," I wanted to cry. "I'll be your mama, and you'll be my son." I resisted. "You can call me Mom or Mama. You can also call me Betsy if you'd rather. Whatever feels okay to you." He stood there a minute, and I waited, expecting a pronouncement of my new title. "What's for dinner?" he asked. "Burgers," I said. "Sweet," he said, tossing the ball as he walked out of the room. At our wedding a few months later, Tom and I said our vows to one another. Then Max was invited to stand beside us, and I made vows to him. I promised to step into the shoes that his mother had been forced to leave behind, to help him remember her, and to be the best mother that I could be. After the wedding, for the next few days, Max tried out a new title for me. "Can we go bowling?" he'd asked, and then he'd follow the question by only mouthing the word. Or, "Can we go to the store?" And he'd mouth the word Mom. Mom was always silent. It seemed he was trying it on, seeing how it felt in his mouth. "What you doing?" "Can I watch TV now?" My hopes floated like pink helium balloons. Then 1,000 hornets of guilt attacked the balloon, piercing it until it lost its air and sank. It felt wrong to take such pleasure in seeing his little plump lips form that singular syllable. After all, this new son of mine was an inheritance that I wouldn't have if he and Tom hadn't sustained such an enormous loss. I felt small, and smaller still when old habits resumed, and Betsy was once again my only title. I tucked this shameful disappointment away, telling no one. Weeks later, as I drove him home from school, Max pulled a baggie full of Cheez-Its from his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle lunchbox. He munched away, licking the orange dust off each finger. With his focus deep inside the near-empty snack bag, he suddenly said, "I notice I don't call you Mom." Who threw that rock at my chest? Dead hit. I breathed to calm my voice. "I noticed that." One last cracker, and then 4 fingers to lick. When I say Betsy, I mean Mom. I swallowed past the dry dirt cloud that had formed in my throat. "Thanks," I said. "Nice to know." He looked out the window. "Mom's died, you know. I think it's maybe safer if I call you Betsy." We could have had a long talk about magical thinking and death, and how nothing that he could say or not say or do could cause me to die, or could have caused his mother to die, but this just didn't seem like the time for all of that. I willed tears away, better than today. I willed tears away, not wanting to overwhelm him. He had enough to carry. "Thanks, Bud. I appreciate you telling me." Those big chocolate eyes found mine. I waited. "Hey, Betsy." "Yeah," I said, delighted with the new sound of my old name. "What's for dinner?" Once again for having us. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, my fellow writers. I'm so deeply honored to be counted among you. And I look out into this crowd and I see a lot of blends. If you weren't born into a blended family, you probably married into one. And if you didn't marry into one, your kids are going to marry into one. Everybody's blended. So I would imagine that any number of books could be bought as gifts. And it can go around. I always think about it, Snow White had 7 dads, and it worked out for her. I figure we can figure that out. I want to thank you all. Please hang out. Kibitz, we're going to have signing hanging out over here. We'd love to greet you all, and thank you all for coming.